So good morning. My name is Andrei Herasimchuk. I am the co-founder of a company called Freestyle Software. We're a new startup in Palo Alto. In my past jobs and gigs, I was director of design for Twitter and Yahoo. And back in the day, I worked for Adobe Systems, which is what I'm going to talk about this morning. Let's just go ahead and get this started, shall we? I'm going to sit down if you folks don't mind. It's going to be a little more comfortable. So, as Jeff mentioned, what I want to talk about today is this question right here. Should designers in high tech learn how to code? As Jeff mentioned, this is kind of a question that comes up a lot these days. There's a lot of debate and discussion on design blogs and design articles. There are many talks at design conferences, like what I'm giving this morning. And so back home in the Silicon Valley area, I mentor a lot of design students. And a lot of them are just coming out of school and they're getting into the job market. And they stress a lot about this question. They always ask me, should I learn how to code? Do I need to know HTML and CSS or JavaScript or Objective-C or Swift or whatever else is out there right now? So to kind of give you my answer on this question, my take on it, I want to share a little story with you about what I consider one of the biggest mistakes I've made in my design career. This is something that if I wound the clock back 20 years, I certainly would do completely differently. It's a story I tell a lot of designers, and I tell it to them in the hopes that they don't make the same mistake that I did. So it was the fall of 1995, and I had just begun my new job as the interface designer at Adobe Systems, back when it was in Mountain View. And to kind of get comfortable in my new gig, I had spent a lot of time drawing up new feature ideas and doing a lot of sketching and rendering and things like that. And one of the first things that I had done was I started going down a path of mocking up Photoshop and Illustrator and PageMaker, which later would become InDesign. I started mocking them up what they would look like if they shared interface conventions. Now, for those of you who may not remember what Photoshop or Illustrator or even PageMaker looked like about 20 years ago, here's one of the screenshots from Illustrator. This will hopefully jog your memory. And you can always look online to find some of the older screenshots. So anyway, I was new to the Bay Area and didn't really know anybody, so I spent a lot of time at Adobe after hours and on weekends doing a lot of work, and I would crank up some really loud industrial music like Nine Inch Nails or KMFDM or something. So you can kind of imagine me sitting in this lone little cubicle inside this empty office and Trent Reznor screaming at the top of his lungs while I'm sketching and drawing away. And so one weekend, I had gotten to what I felt like was a pretty good spot with the mock-ups that I was doing. And so I did basically what I had done before I joined Adobe up to that point. I kind of pulled out Macromedia Director and started putting together a prototype using Lingo. So I had started writing a bunch of scripts and started doing what I'd always enjoyed doing, which was making everything kind of come alive. So, for example, you would click on the menu bar and the menu would drop down. You could see all the proposed terminology changes or keyboard shortcuts that I was looking to do. You can move the cursor around and choose tools and it would change and highlight the buttons and dialogues would pop up. Or you can even take palettes and you could drag them around on the screen. And I was kind of just mocking all these things up together. Quite frankly, this is all pretty simple stuff. It's just scripting. Most of the time, it was just rectangles filled with pixel-perfect mock-ups. So basically, I'd gotten to a pretty good spot with what I was doing and kind of got into a nice flow there. And the next thing I was about to start doing is making the palettes collapse, so mimicking a lot of the interactive behaviors, a little more complex scripting. And so essentially what I was doing is making just a lightweight prototype. This is the kind of thing that designers these days do with products like InVision or Framer Studio. So to back up further for a second, I should let you know that my design training, my formal design training, was actually in a theater. I had kind of cut my teeth on production design. As a kid, I wanted to grow up and I wanted to be part of making movies, either as a director or as a production designer. And so, in the theater, I would work on building sets and painting sets and hanging lights and rendering and building scale models and whatnot. So for me, building models, drawing things to scale, rendering an idea before you ever put it into production, this is all just simply part of the job in the theater. So the first thing you do is you have an idea and you would draw out what you wanted to do, and you kind of iterate on the drawing and the sketch. And then you would build a scale model, and you'd kind of bring the director in, and you would work through notes and collaborate, and then you iterate some more. And then you might go and build the set. And when the set's all built and you've got everything in place, you would bring the director in as well, and you would continue your collaboration and more iteration. And then you would put it through a dry run. And you did all of these kinds of things before you ever even considered putting the production in front of a paying audience. So from my point of view, iteration and prototyping have never been in question as part of the design process. So that's just kind of where I come from, and that's just how I thought of the design process. So back to 1995, and I had spent a solid weekend, a good 48 hours, putting together this prototype of Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign using Director. And I was kind of bringing everything to life. I enjoy doing this because, quite frankly, doing this kind of stuff to make changes and getting feedback from the team was much easier to make the changes. So you just go into the scripts and you can change a few things, rebuild the presentation, and you can sit there and play with the prototype in a much better fashion. Ultimately, I did wind up having to do things like, make a big spreadsheet in Excel, and it was just this gargantuan spreadsheet with all the shortcuts and the terminology. I had all these, screenshots and renderings that I did, and fixing those and adjusting those, the mock-ups and the spreadsheets and whatnot, it takes easily 3 to 4 times as long as it would to fix things in the prototype. So I was pretty quite happy with the way that prototype came about, and screenshots, like the ones you see behind me and whatnot, they're always pretty good at communicating the visceral impact of the changes that you're doing. But obviously, prototypes communicate those changes on an order of magnitude better. So the following week, back in 1995, I was in my cubicle, and one of the product managers came walking by. And I was pretty excited about everything that I was doing. This is only a few months into my job, and so I really wanted to show off what I was working on to this product manager. So I opened up the prototype. He sat down at my desk, and I opened up the prototype, and I started clicking around, and menus would drop, and I would choose a menu item, and a dialog would pop up, or I'd click on the tool palettes, and things would change. And I could see this product manager was getting pretty excited. Their eyes kind of lit up, especially when I would show off something like the new character palette design that I was proposing and whatnot, and you could just drag it around. They obviously thought that I had done something far more complicated, probably spent a lot of time putting together a fully coded app or something like that. But in fact, it was just a simple prototype. But then it happened. So this product manager was very well liked at Adobe and had been there for a while. They said, Andrei, this is really very cool. We've never had anyone go to these lengths to propose changes this way, using this kind of a prototype. But I really have to wonder, how long did it take you to make this? And so, I was, young and pretty excited, and it was like, it only took me 48 hours. It was like a weekend and a couple of days since, no big deal. And they kind of looked at me and said, well, that's great. This is certainly very, very good work. But I have to tell you, you're going to have to do this for all of the products going forward. The screenshots that you've done here, these are plenty. It's all we've ever really done before. So I don't know if you really need to spend time making prototypes. And so next came the mistake. And so like I said, from my point of view, in my opinion, this is easily one of the biggest mistakes that I've made in my design career. I kind of sat down and thought about what they said for a second, and I looked back at them and said, okay, I guess, if you think so. And, I never built another prototype while working at Adobe ever again. So I worked at Adobe for 5 years, working on what would become the Creative Suite. And I left Adobe, so I worked from 1995 to about 2000, and I left to go do the web thing, which was pretty big at the end of the dot-com days. And when I did that, I went and tried to get back into learning all of the stuff that I kind of let become stagnant while I was at Adobe. And so about 5 years after that, I kind of got my scripting and coding with, so scripting with HTML and CSS and some coding with PHP and whatnot. I kind of got it back to a point that was, quite frankly, where it was when I stopped doing it. So it took me literally 10 years to get back to where I was even reasonably comfortable with it. So I didn't follow through with my normal design process and prototyping, and I just let my skills lag. So these days, when I look at it, I look at, had I stayed with the scripting, it would have evolved into coding now. I would have gotten into things further and sooner and would have, quite frankly, really upped my skills. These days at Freestyle, my co-founder and I, we're doing everything in JavaScript. And with the technology these days, like React Native and React and GraphQL and Node.js and all these other things, it's quite amazing to me what I can actually put together. And I still kind of kick myself for letting those skills lag, because right now I've got all these gaps of knowledge that I have to constantly refill. So back to the question then, the question is, should designers learn how to code? And given what I've done in my career, and now being on the other side of 20 years, my answer is actually pretty simple. The answer is simply, yes, absolutely. In my opinion, if you want a career to be as a designer, designing digital products and software, you absolutely need to learn how to code. I don't believe there's any exceptions to this. I don't think there's an it depends. I actually truly believe you should spend time and just dive in and learn how to code. As a bonus question, as a bonus answer real quick, quite frankly, HTML and CSS is mostly scripting. It's not really coding. Given the state of web standards and how far we've come, I just learn how to do it. If you're a designer, just learn how to do it. Quite frankly, Sketch and Photoshop, learning those is far more difficult than learning HTML and CSS. So just get that over with and dive in on that. As a double bonus, I work with a lot of very smart engineers in Silicon Valley, and they've all given me this advice. If you're going to dive in and learn how to code, which you should, then just learn JavaScript. Ignore everything else for now. There's a lot of great tools that are around with JavaScript, like I said, and you'll be fine if you just take the dive in that one. So yes, from my point of view, absolutely. You need to learn how to code if you want to make designing digital products your career. And that's the key word there, a career. From my point of view, if you don't do this, at best, all you're really going to have is a really good job. Now, being a designer in tech, that job is a very rewarding and a very high-paying job. But from my point of view, it's just a job. So what's a job? A job is something that's at the whim of market forces and product trends. You have to kind of do what's hot and what's going on right now. A job is something that someone else is ultimately going to control some aspect of the design from you. A job is something that you don't have full control over, your company does. And you, quite frankly, should set your expectations accordingly about the job. A job is that thing that you are going to spend 40 hours a week just to earn a living. But quite frankly, if you're going to be honest with yourself, you're waiting for the nights and the weekends to go do that thing that you really love to do. So to me, that's what a job is. Now a career, which is what I'm talking about, a career is something that, quite frankly, you're going to spend decades doing. A career is going to fulfill and reward you in ways that money or your position in the company's org chart simply can't. From my point of view, a career is one of those things that it's going to make your heart ache, knowing just how much you're going to miss it when you kick this mortal coil. So from my point of view, if you want a career as a designer in tech, then you really, really do need to train up in the art of code. Further, when you do this and you take that dive, you're going to enjoy it in ways that you possibly can't imagine until you do. So you're going to gain knowledge about the things that you make. And that knowledge is going to give you the power to actually make things with your own two hands. For me, that's one of the reasons why I became a designer, to bring into creation things that didn't exist before. As far as I'm concerned, like one of the best addictions as a designer is making something with my own two hands that didn't exist in the universe until I made it. It's to me like the difference between riding as the passenger in a race car versus being the guy behind the wheel. It's like the difference between indoor skydiving in a wind tunnel versus actually getting in a plane and jumping out of it and parachuting. To me, it's the difference between feeling really good about the work you do and kicking ass and taking names. And I want to be clear here. To me, making something with your own two hands is a superpower. And so why on earth would you willingly rob yourself of that? So code is a critical component in digital products. Not knowing it or understanding it means that at best you're going to be flying blind on the job. Having like a minimal amount of knowledge like HTML or CSS, that's certainly fine. You're going to need that, but in my opinion, that's still not enough. What I'm talking about is knowing how to code, like taking a deep dive into something like JavaScript. To me, that's where it's at. That's where you're going to enjoy everything the most. So as long as code has to be written to make software, learning how to do it as a designer is going to be one of your superpowers. All you have to do, all I'm telling you that you have to do, is just embrace that. And so here's the good news when you do. You're going to have an entire career to learn how to code. Decades. This is not something you need to do right now. It's not something you need to do next week. Not even something you need to do this year, possibly. But you have an entire career to do this. Everyone wants to be a master of things, right now or tomorrow or next month. Everybody wants to lose 20 pounds in like a week or, become a master guitar player without ever having to practice. But that's not the point. The point that this is a career. Taking the time to learn something that is out of your comfort zone, I get it. That kind of thing can be a scary proposition. It's going to take weeks, months, years to learn this stuff. But from my point of view, this isn't a pipe dream. Like I said, we're talking about a career in design. So with that in mind, you're going to need to nurture that career, grow it, and love it for decades, hopefully a lifetime. My advice is that you shouldn't worry about if you're ever going to understand it or get it. You shouldn't be concerned with if you're going to be any good at it. And quite frankly, you shouldn't definitely worry about if you've got too much work to do already. This is not going to take away from everything else that you have to do as a designer. It's not going to lessen your skills in color and type or in research or understanding the user or any of those other things. It doesn't take it away. In fact, looking back on it, I promise you that if you do this, you're going to be amazed at how much more you can accomplish, not less, if you take the dive and learn how to code. You're going to look back on it, and you're going to suddenly realize that, yeah, I did kick ass and take names. I spent 20 years in this business, and I know that as a fact. It's not about whether you need to be required to code on your job. It's not about whether it's something that you're going to be asked to be accountable for, with your company. This is about you, not about anything else. It's about your career. And from that point of view, you absolutely should take the dive and embrace being a designer in tech and learn how to code. Just learn it. Don't worry about anything else. That's the first step. All the other things will work themselves out later. And so finally, I want to give you one last bit of advice as I leave you today. Once you do decide to learn how to code, which I'm going to assume all of you are, once you do decide to take that plunge, finally, please, don't let anyone ever talk you out of it. Thank you for your time.